All right, well, welcome back, everybody. This is the second to the last panel this year, and I'm really excited to have three close friends of mine from different parts of Europe who are going to be contributing on this panel with their perspectives on their observations for, what has been changing in their climate and the effect that that's been having on their farms, as well as the adaptations and the experiments that they're trying out. And we're also going to explore support mechanisms and where there are opportunities and hope. Now, this is part of the panel series that the Climate Farmers Academy has been putting out for a couple of years now. We really encourage, if any of you are active farmers in Europe, to consider joining the community. It's completely free. We explore topics like this and are constantly encouraging the exchange of ideas as people are all on their learning journey towards a regenerative management of their farms. And that's the place to go and talk about it. We're constantly putting out new resources and support mechanisms for people in their transition. And we would love to have you there to join the conversations. Now, to get us started today, I'm going to start with the question, first of all, to give a little bit of an introduction to your farm and your operations. And if you could add on to that, what you have observed in the challenges and the changes in the climate and how that's affected your operation. So let's start with Beata.
Cool. Happy to do that. Hi, Beate. Running a regenerative olive oil farm in the north of Greece. But when we say olive oil, that's really just our main crop. All of our activities are focused on a much broader scale, really, because we are observing a lot of changes and we just want to have it as diverse as possible for a multitude of reasons. So it includes agroforestry, syntropic designs, it includes our lovely donkeys, a little bit of poultry, sheep, etc., rotational grazing, market garden, but really just for us and the closer community that we have around us. So lots of bits and pieces. We are situated close to the Bulgarian border, which means it's mountainous area. We are only 10 minutes drive away from the sea. So I have a lovely Mediterranean climate, but also the really steep mountain fields that we are working with that we can't or partially can't access with tractors. It's a very rough climate during the winter, or at least that's what it's supposed to be. So close to us, the peak has 3,000 meters. There used to be ski lifts, but now we have 8 years with little to no frost in the winter, which is definitely one of the biggest changes, little to no snow. Pretty much we just go from spring in February, starting full on, to a very hot summer, going right into autumn, and winter just never shows up. So every year is different. Rainfall for this area, the average should be around 700 mm. The highest that we experienced was 450, and that was a really blessed year. So that's changing. We did have, just like Spain, Portugal as well, in the last years, a couple of really intense heat waves. So all of that obviously is impacting the farm, even so much so that the olive trees were struggling. So that's our context.
Wow, those are very significant changes. I've heard similar things from other people, but the laying it out like that in specifics really gives you a picture of what you're up against. Sergio, will you give us an idea about what you're working with and the challenges that you're facing at the moment? Oh, you're still on mute, bud.
Sorry, Sergio here from Portugal. I'm working in vineyards, 10 hectares. A vineyard is very, very small operation. And yeah, the climate has been changing a lot in the few years. It's been last year, for example, it was a very dry winter, and then we had a lot of rain in the spring. It's been all concentrated in some parts of the year. After harvest, we had a lot of rain also now. I had some things to do, like playing biology and everything, and I had to stop. Yeah, it's all concentrated in some parts of the year, and we have climatic events. It's very different. We have very mild winters lately, that it doesn't, and the leaves stay on the vineyards for longer because we don't have frost, we don't have low temperatures. I'm very close to the sea, so it's a mild temperature normally, but yeah, normally it would be now very, 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 it would be cold. So yeah, and also the streams, the water streams, and then the rivers around they only have water when it rains a lot, and then it goes all the way. And we have in the last 2 weeks, I made some videos of a lot of erosion because we had 200 millimeters in 4 days. So yeah, it's been, of course, in my farm, I've been managing to harvest more rain because I have a lot of cover crops and water is infiltrating. Now I have more organic matter and it's also storing better now.
Hmm.
Yeah.
How has this specifically been affecting the vines, the grapevines?
Well, yeah, so there's a lot of things that we have to, that's a, a big question. We have a lot of things to start implementing in the vineyards and start harvesting that water. But yeah, it's also the rootstocks we've been using. We have to think a lot of managing that and thinking in a different way, and then managing the plantation of the vineyards in a different way also, because we used to have a lot of shallow rootstocks, and we have to go for deeper rootstocks, for example.
Hmm.
And then we have to start managing that also. And the vineyards, because we don't use every irrigation, this year we had a lot of rain in the spring, but then we didn't have any more rain, and then the vineyard started to feel that. Yeah.
Really interesting. And I've actually gone out to see your farm, and I'm really looking forward to the part where we get to the adaptations and the experiments that you're doing, because you're trying a lot of stuff. But before we get to that, Howard, can you tell us about your operation? Because you're in a very different context than these two down in the Mediterranean area.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we farm 25 hectares in the Netherlands, on the east side of the Netherlands. We started in 2022. It's 25 hectares of former conventional dairy farm. There's 3 farmers. My partner Claudia, who's very busy planting food forests at the moment. We have a market garden and a market gardener, Elina, and then myself, and I'm taking care of the arable land. The arable land we're also doing in agroforestry systems, so alley cropping. We really believe in trees, but I think we'll get into that a bit more later. So yeah, we're building a system in which we grow food directly for human consumption. And we're trying to sort of provide a sort of a 360 solution to some of the challenges we're facing in the Netherlands in our industrial food system. If I look at climate change, I think something that's really interesting was when we came here, we also spoke to some of the old farmers in the area, also to ask, for example, about what the water level, the groundwater level is. And they say, yeah, the groundwater level fluctuates between 1 meter below field to 2.5 meters below the field level. And we've now at our 4th year, so in 4 years' time, we've seen it at 10 centimeters below field level. Basically, really, you just put a spade in the ground and the water came up. And we've seen it at lower than 3.5 meters. So basically, we're seeing extremes in both ways that like 70-year-old farmers have never seen in their lives who live there always. And the reason for this is that we're quite close to the Rhine. And we're in former floodplains of the Rhine. We're about 2 kilometers, 2.5 kilometers away from the Rhine. And our groundwater is connected through sandy creeks below the ground. And so basically our groundwater level is directly influenced by the water level of the Rhine. And until a few decades ago, the Rhine was about 50% ice and snow fed and 50% rain fed from the Alps. And nowadays, now that we don't have glaciers and we don't have much snow anymore, what you see is that the Rhine is 70% rain fed. And that means that in the winter, we're seeing extreme peaks in high water levels. And in the summer, we're seeing like historical low levels of water. So basically, when the Rhine is very low, it's sucking out all the groundwater from our area. And when it's really high, it's pushing water into our area. So that's a very, very radical change. And we've been having to make adaptations to that. And the other thing is that when we started farming, when I started the arable farming in 2023, we went straight into the 2 wettest consecutive years in the Netherlands ever measured. In 2023, it was even wetter because it was the warmest and wettest year ever measured. But in the wettest year ever measured, we had the longest period without rainfall ever measured as well. From 2024 into 2025, we went straight into the driest spring ever measured. So and then these things in perspective to other countries with more extreme climates, it's still sort of all in moderation because this is the Netherlands. But for us, it's quite radical.
Wow, that's intense, man. I mean, I knew it was going to be an interesting conversation talking to farmers about this because you guys pay very close attention to what's going on. It directly affects your work and the health of your crops and your animals. But I am impressed by the level of detail that you can speak to this on. And I'm doing similar things and keeping track of all the local weather meters and trying to find historical data to compare things to, because similarly, I haven't been on this land base for very long. And it's through this monitoring and tracking that we can start to get an understanding of the extremes that we're up against and then start to make decisions based on that. So back to Beata, can you tell me about how you're dealing with this, knowing that these are going to become more extreme, but at the same time, more predictably extreme? How are you shoring up the enterprises on your farm to confront this reality?
Yeah, I think the common theme there, because there's so many different things and challenges we already mentioned, is to take a lot more bets and really to mix things up, because you never know what kind of year you're going to have. So for us, it's trying really a diversity of crops, undergrowing in the orchards. So one year you are lucky with asparagus under the olives, another year it might be potatoes, another year none of that works and it's just the olives. Really mixing those things up, that's one. I mean, how you mentioned irrigation, that's a big one, because over here as well, during the summer months, everything is dried out, or at least during the 4-hour slots that you are being given, the machines, the pumps are running dry, so you have to go back in the middle of the night and look after the field. So it's really planning always for not having any irrigation at all, planning for always absorbing as much rainfall as possible, both through improving the soil structure, obviously, and the soil biology. We would love to do more on the side of earthworks. I know all of you know that. We would love to, but we are not in the position to get the permit for that. So that's long outstanding, but doing everything we can, whether it's with swales, whether it's with the direction that we are planting, terracing on the fields, especially those fields that are on a very steep slope, making sure that we do whatever we can. And it's also for the heat waves, managing the sun. So we realized, fortunately, because we were using kaolin, which is a super fine clay, white clay, which is very useful to be sprayed on the olive leaves and coat the olives with that to protect against the olive fly. That was really the intention. However, because it is white, it does have the reflective properties, and it really helps the whole orchard to keep on doing photosynthesis if sun is becoming too direct, too hot, and whatever. So right now, half of our basement actually is blocked with bags of kaolin, because we were planning to use that again this year. Ended up with a rather normal summer, so that's still laying there. But you really have to just be prepared for all of that. Mix a lot of crops. Definitely soil is the number one, and diversity of plants, including things that I previously would have ripped out immediately because they were either invasive or very annoying. Oliver, I have this one like really thorny version that I love to get out of the field because it makes working the field almost impossible. But now we're keeping it and pruning it as if it was the most special, precious one we have on the field, really just to keep plantation growing there to produce biomass, even in tricky years. So it's a lot of pieces coming together there.
That's really interesting. I'm looking forward to digging more into that because there's a lot to unpack there. But Sergio, first give us an idea about how you're doing this on your vineyard with the challenges that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, so first is enhancing photosynthesis also, so that we can harvest more sunlight and carbon and put it in the soil. And of course, we do sap analysis throughout the year, not only to know what we have too much of, but also what we have lack of, and we have to add to the plants so that they're more resilient to this kind of, and to cope better with all these climate events. Also, bioreactors. We make a lot of bioreactors and then to put biology in the soil again and put all this microbiome and put this fungi again, because when we started, we only have almost bacteria because we till the soil a lot and you use a lot of chemicals. So we need those fungi to build those macro aggregates and the bacteria to build the micro aggregates and to build that soil food web. And put the most carbon we can in the soil and recycle that carbon and put leaves on top of it to cycle that carbon. Yeah, and of course, animal integration as much as we can in the winter because it's a perennial. We are working in vineyards, so we have dormancy now, and when we have a good cover crop, we put the sheep of my neighbors. I don't have sheep, but they come in and they graze the vineyards. It's also very good for the soil. And we have projects. I want to put poultry also and to also diversify my farm and to have more income streams. It's not easy because it's only 10 hectares and we only have vineyards, but we have a lot of ideas to improve stuff. And I'm planting a lot of trees along the vineyards to cope with erosion and to have more biodiversity of birds and reptiles and mammals and everything. So yeah, it's adding diversity the more we can. And also building organic matter, because if you put 1% more organic matter in the soil, we can store from 150,000 liters to 250,000 liters. So it's very important to build that organic matter so that we can harvest more. First infiltrate and then harvest and store more water in the soil.
Yeah, very good points there, especially when the rain events are coming so sporadically and sometimes incredibly violently, and you don't know when they're going to come back. If you're losing water in these heavy rain events, that might be all you get for the season. And it's all the more important nowadays to infiltrate, store, save every last drop because you just don't know when you're going to get it again. And one thing I want to mention before we go to Howard that I think will be common knowledge to any farmers in the audience, but I don't know that the public grasps this because I constantly hear, oh, well, as the climate gets warmer, your growing season is extending. And it's like, yeah, well, okay, maybe the frosts are going away and maybe the shoulder seasons are getting longer. But I think what a lot of people don't understand is that when the temperature starts to go above 32 degrees in the summer, most plants can't photosynthesize under those conditions, and they go into survival mode. And if there's not enough moisture in the system for them to cool themselves through transpiration, this is when you start to lose crops. This is when yields dip. This is when you really start to get into crisis mode. And okay, you might be gaining a little bit of frost-free time in the spring and in the autumn, but if you're losing photosynthetic capacity when the most sun is in the fields, that's not helpful whatsoever, right? We're starting, especially in these Mediterranean contexts, to have these mini dead periods, almost like a winter, but the opposite, where you can't grow anything, even though there's no frost because it's too extreme on the other side. Anyway, I think that's important to grasp, right?
Yeah.
Yes, and super, super important that you mentioned that also because the perception that frost is necessarily a bad thing, it's quite the opposite. So we do have plants that actually need it. It could wipe out a whole crop season if you're not getting the frost.
Yeah.
We mentioned the soil microbiology. They just need some action as well. Pests and diseases, some that used to get wiped out by frost as well, that now need to be managed. Otherwise, soil biology would greatly benefit from having that cold period under a nice blanket of snow. That would just boost it. And it's also, I mean, last year, all of the brassicas that we planted, for example, because spring came so early and with such high temperatures, they all went into sprouting and flowering immediately. So it's also that by shifting the seasons, you might not even get the crop that you want. Yes, it's nice and warm outside and we can do the work in a bikini, but no crop there. So there's definitely more downside than upside to that. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, very good point. Let's go to Howard now. Tell me about, in your different contexts with the extremes that you're facing, how you are experimenting and trying new things to overcome these challenges.
Yeah, first I'd like to finish the ode to frost, because there's one other thing that hasn't been mentioned yet. And for us, we have quite a heavy river clay soil. And we try not to plow, so we do non-inversion tillage. And then actually a few days of like -7 really helps us to improve soil structure, because it actually cracks open the soil, the heavy clay soil. So it actually helps us fight compaction and improve the soil structure. So we actually also miss our frost.
Yeah, very good point.
Yeah, then from our side, what is predicted here and what we're also seeing regarding climate change in the Netherlands is longer dry, hot spells. And then the intermittent rainfall is actually faster and heavier. So in that sense, we look towards trees to help us out. When we started farming here on the 25 hectares, there were 0 trees. It's just one big flat surface with perennial ryegrass. So in the meantime, we've planted about 12,000 trees. So in the form of indigenous trees surrounding all the parcels of our land, and then also in fruit and nut trees in between. But I always like to say it like, you know, if you're outside and it starts raining really hard, you're smart if you go and stand under a tree because you stay dry for a bit. But if it stops raining and you're still standing under the tree, then you get wet. So basically that's what a tree is doing. It's like mitigating the heavy rainfall, and it's allowing the rain to hit the ground at a slower pace and allowing the ground to absorb the water more. Secondarily, of course, those are trees, they can reach to deeper levels. So when our groundwater drops to 3.5 meters, our trees can still pump up the water. And in the arable land, for example, we have 36-meter wide fields. And then we planted a row of plum trees or hazelnuts or apple trees in between, including some berry bushes and stuff like that. They'll grow and they'll form actually some wind protection. So you have less evapotranspiration in the hot summers. Then hopefully we don't have to irrigate as much. So in that sense, we're using a lot of trees. Of course, the organic matter is important, and that's something that also not everybody realizes, because you think, okay, it's a no-brainer, right? You put the straw of your cereal, you're growing a wheat, you put the straw back in your soil. But if you look at how much it costs, how much the land costs, how much mechanization and labor costs, and what you get for the wheat, basically you actually also need to pack the straw into straw bales and sell that too as organic straw bales to actually make a profit of your land. So putting the straw back into the soil is actually costing money. And that's something you need to realize. And of course, in the long term, we believe it's going to earn us money, but it's like a long-term investment because it's going to take 10 years to get the organic matter up a few percent. And at the meantime, we're literally putting our money in the soil.
Yeah.
Then the final thing, which is pretty cool, which we did this year, we were fighting for a long time with permits because the Romans used to live in this area. So digging is a bit of a thing. If you dig deeper than 30 centimeters, you need all kinds of archaeological surveys and stuff like that. So we fought the municipality for a few years, finally got permission to dig, but then we did actually end up finding a Roman village. So the municipality was right in the end. But what we did was we dug a riparian buffer. We had a canal all the way in the length across our land. So it goes for about 700 meters across our land, and it had very steep embankments. So what we did is we dug one embankment, we made it flat for 8 meters. And that means you've got like an extra water storage. So all the cubic meters of soil that you take out is cubic meters of water that you can hold on to in the canal when you want. But then also because we saw that the groundwater level is coming so high, what Claudia did in the 3 hectares where she's now planting a productive food forest is she actually took strips of 20 meters wide and she heightened them 50 to 75 centimeters so that she'll plant the trees like the walnuts, the apricots, the figs. She's planting them higher so that they can have a bit of dry feet in the winter. And then the trees like apple trees and other trees that are more adapted to our climate and don't mind a bit of wet feet, they're in the lower areas. So we actually use the earth coming out of the canal for this purpose. And then finally, of course, people who know a bit about the Netherlands, you think, hey, apricots, figs that are not really typically Dutch trees. So we're also already sort of working towards the idea of having less frost and then also implementing trees that can do well in a warmer climate.
Yeah, hedging your bets on either side, really smart. And I've heard about that method before. I've seen some expositions, and that technique of mounding earth up to keep the roots of certain trees drier in areas that tend to get waterlogged. That goes back actually to the Romans as well. And so full circle there, buddy. Well, look.
And I also really like what Beate said about diversity. You know, that's also what we think is basically what I said is what we think the climate will do, but what we know is that it's just getting way hard to predict it. And by just adding a crazy amount of biodiversity and also like productive diversity, basically we say, okay, we don't care what type of weather it is, we're going to have something on our farm that's doing well.
Yeah, I mean, this seems to be the most common thread from everything that all three of you are talking about, right? The way to confront all of these vagrancies of the weather and the climate is to diversify, not to put all of your eggs in one basket, either literally or figuratively, and know that there's always going to be something that you can't predict each season that may favor or completely wipe out one crop or another. But if you're not dependent on one thing, there's much more likelihood that at least you'll get some yield, you'll get some product before the end of the season. Now, before I go back to Sergio, can you tell me about some of the main things that you've learned or the new experiments that you'd like to try based on the experience you're building with all of these other experiments? Howard?
Sorry, I didn't realize you were asking me. Yeah, the main thing, yeah, so it's difficult to say because we've been busy for 4 years now. So what we when we started, we already realized, okay, one of our main goals was to build a climate adaptive system. I think at a large scale, what I learned is not to get pushed into the climate mitigation corner where farmers have to solve the problems of the world. I think we're not going to change climate change. It's happening. We need to adapt to it. And what I see at our farm is sometimes I wish we started 10 years earlier because I feel like, okay, we're building a climate adaptive system, but the climate is way ahead of us already and it's changed. So sometimes it's super hard in these times to actually still build your system because, yeah, I mean, you got the wettest years ever, the driest springs ever. It's giving such a shock to the system. Yeah, so I think on the one side it's tough. On the other side, I do see also in the Netherlands that society is keying into this now. Also, we're really sort of in the south, in Zeeland, there's a province, it's right by the sea level is rising, the water level is dropping, so they can't even irrigate now because there's salt water coming out of the ground. And this sort of things they're hitting home now. People are starting to realize that we're getting a problem. So also, if we look at like sort of the province of Gelderland where we are, they're actually putting aside a lot of money and putting aside resources to gain knowledge and to help farmers in adapt and change. And also saying, okay, well, if farmers are part of the solution, then we need to actually start valuing them for this rather than only valuing them for primary productivity. So while we're way behind on climate change, I do feel like that we're also starting to get some societal support in what we're trying to do, which is necessary.
Yeah, very good point. Same question to you, Sergio. With all of the learnings from these experiments that you've been trying, what do you feel has worked the best out of all of the different things that you've been doing for the soil? And is there anything else that you'd like to add to the rotation of experiments in the future?
Well, one of the things that has been working very well is the precision nutrition with the sap analysis. It's working very well, and we have more nutritious fruit and better grapes. And I think the immunity of the plants is also getting much better year by year. And we also measure bricks of the sap of our plants. We are doing different seaweed extracts, fish hydrolysis to feed the biology, lactic acid bacteria. And I'm very excited now because we are starting with the different mulches, or also some experiences with, for example, in Portugal, that wool, it was close to nothing, the wool from the sheep. We are making mulch with the wool in the rows of the vineyards. It's going very well. I don't know if you can see.
Yeah, we can see that. Wow, epic.
So this is all wool. Some friend of mine gave me like a big truck of wool for me to test on the vineyards, and for free. Of course, it's demanding on the hand labor, but I think it works very well because it allows me to control a bit also some weeds in the row, but also protects the soil. And when it's degrading, the wool, it's very good for biology. It's a very good. It's not a compost, but it's very nutritious also because it's full of essential oils and protein. It's very, very good. So yeah, and of course doing some experiments with different cover crops and species.
Yeah, that's really cool. So that is a potential pairing that could really work out in rural areas because the prices for wool in general are so low. People are struggling to keep that as an enterprise with their sheep. There could be a
Unfortunately.
really good pairing for this real value that it has, depending on the cultivars and the cultivation culture around them. That could be a really good pairing to bring value back and to bring what is otherwise usually thrown away in the waste stream into a valuable resource for farmers.
Exactly.
Strangely, we also use wool around our trees, but for a different reason. And we really wrap it around the bark all the way up to the branches because it stops the deers and the hares from eating it for some reason. They don't like to get the wool in their mouth, so we use it as a protection.
Oh, brilliant. I hadn't heard it used that way. There's another good opportunity for connection.
I don't have that problem here, so I don't have deer or hares. No problem.
Beat, the same question to you. So, from the learnings of all the experiments that you've tried, what are you doubling down on, and what would you like to add to your experiments moving forward?
Everything we are doubling down on is based on, I think, what Howard just said earlier, realizing how fast things are changing. So in the beginning, I had this brilliant idea of on the side also founding a compost company, really just to produce the best outstanding microbial rich compost, but ended up wasting so much time fighting for legislation, for permits, etc., that yes, I keep on fighting and there's a good reason to do that. But the focus needs to be on what can I do right now and what has the highest impact. And then really, it's like an interest effect. So it's compounding over the years and really looking into what is compounding the most or what has the highest impact right now. So no, I leave the compost company aside. Yes, that's ongoing. But rather, I spend my time even on ridiculous things like protecting the lemons in winter when, after all, we do get a night of frost, and protecting them with the heaters that we have for our baby chicks one by one outside, because we're mainly based on perennial ones. So having a 2-meter high lemon tree and protecting that one is a better use of my time than just trying to push legislation forward, or could be. The other thing is really trying to combine more of the steps more into one solution. So, I mean, we mentioned bioreactors and getting mushrooms back into the soil. So while we do love growing trees from seeds, we see they are a lot more resistant. We have better growth, less irrigation need and all that. There's every year, though, a batch growing in our own bioreactor compost and soil mix, trying different soil mixes, including ones from even higher up the mountains to have more diversity of microbes in there as well in soil life, adding IMO to it and growing those pots so that when we plant the tree, we immediately inoculate with full spectrum and bring that to new fields or new rows as well, rather than going out there and just separately applying compost extract, teas, etc., which we also do, but really trying to combine those steps. Seaweed, another great one. Sergio mentioned that, as well as wool, but also combining those. So that could be something as simple as getting it every time we're back from the beach, but also talking to the local municipalities. How can you help us to actually something that is ending up in the waste stream right now, like wool, like seaweed, etc.? How can we get that into a chain where not only our fields, but all of the farmers can benefit from it, and the waste chain benefits from that? And the other big one is animals wherever we can. It's tricky for most of our orchards because they are all separated. It's like 10 different fields with like up to 15 minutes driving apart from each other. It's not easy to fence them. We do have wolves, we do have foxes, we do have wild boars. So that's a big challenge there. But we just see whenever animals are included in the system, regeneration is just so much higher and faster that we really want to focus more on that as well. We're going to spend the next week time at the amazing farm Puligaro. in Italy together at Marco and Chiara's place. So I'm super excited to see their model because they are big on having those beautiful dogs protecting all of their poultry. So maybe that's something we can take over here as well, because really that speeds up regeneration of the soil like nothing else.
And really interesting. And I'm going to reach out to you privately after this about how you're inoculating your seeds, because I have been starting to do a mix of kind of the local sandy soil that I have and the beam compost that I make as the stratification material for the tree nursery that I am doing. And
Yes.
I would love
And
to get ideas for what you're finding works. And this is really important.
on that one, just when you mentioned that, also something I would advise everyone to read up on. I'm a huge fan of Matt Power's Regenerative Soil, because so many times we are really doubling down and trying super hard, but just overlooking this one missing piece in the soil that could make all the difference. Because yes, we are adding organic matter, we are adding the soil biology, but still we might be completely overlooking what's happening on the redox potential side, or is it just one mineral that is missing? So to understand a little bit more like how all of those work together, and where sometimes we might have a showstopper that is just so tiny that we overlooked it, but that could change the whole system. That's another big one.
Yeah, his materials are really good. And I have a couple of episodes in my podcast interviewing him on his books. So I recommend people check those out. Before I keep moving through the questions, you mentioned that you've been hitting some roadblocks in some of the things that you would like to do. You specifically mentioned the regulatory bodies that don't let you do the earthworks that you think would be important. What are all of these hurdles or barriers that are slowing down what you think is correct for the adaptation of your farm?
Oh, I think we need to extend this meeting for another 3 hours. And before I go into that, I think one word worth mentioning is that is exactly because there is so many roadblocks that all of us are facing. Why this year, for example, I spent a lot more time than previously working for EARA and seeing how we can address some of those together, working also with Shaila here over from Greece with regenerative farming Greece. So to see what can we do together, because if we try to address them one by one, we are not going to get there in this lifetime. And it's also not a very appealing and compelling story for the municipalities compared to when you're gathering up and approaching it together on the local level, at the same time also at the European level. So I think it really has to come both ways.
Yeah.
Look, it starts with which fields are you allowed to integrate animals on? Are you allowed to raise them there? Or after you had animals, are you allowed to sell that crop? Is that even going to be okay? It is also coming down to a lot of outdated field measuring. So for example, this year we had Greece coming back to us saying like, we are cutting this percentage of your field, we are cutting this percentage of your field, and it's now being marked in the official systems, which are for insurance events, but also a little bit remuneration for planning, for anything that is going on the official level. They are being deducted because they look too green. So essentially everywhere where I had a good line, where agroforestry was picking off, they said that is unmanaged. This is not an olive orchard. We're going to take it out. At the same time, officially, I'm only allowed to sell olives from my olive orchard. No other product. So while you could do alley cropping, while you could grow other herbs and sell them, you're actually not allowed to. And in the case, like we had a really extreme hail event with like plum size hail 3 years ago, you would only be insured for your main crop that is listed. So that is one. Earthworks, you mentioned them, really strict. Anything that goes deeper than 20 centimeters or 30 centimeters is a challenge to get permits for. At the same time, on the neighboring side of the road, they might be doing ridiculously expensively funded EU projects to prevent erosion, something that we could do better on our fields, but we are not allowed to. It's stuff like for my composting area, I'm required, or they want me to pour concrete over the whole area, which is ridiculous. And the point is, well, something could penetrate into the soil. And because composting is in the waste management category, we need to prevent that anything is being leached into the soil, even if I'm selling it for exactly that reason. Because it's an operation, you need to get a building permit for a small office there and a toilet and a shower, because it's waste management. So your employees need to be capable to wash off any contamination. So there's really lots of things that are just not making sense or are completely outdated. Howard mentioned the digging, and that's the same here in Greece. Also, we're close to where they found the tomb from Alexander the Great. Lots of artifacts over here as well. So that's another challenge. And it's just, it adds up. It really adds up. So we need to address it together as like a movement locally and then on the EU level.
Thank you for giving those specific examples. I know so many farmers who have come up against those hurdles, and I really applaud you and all of the other people who are taking the time to, well, invest in trying to change these things, in creating coalitions, in investing in advocacy work at the EU level and at the local level, because that's the only thing that's going to start to put some common sense back into these policies. Back to you, Sergio. Tell me about the hurdles that you're finding that are impeding the progress and the experimentation that you want to be doing.
Well, it's also funding legislation. If I want to have some funding to change the way I do my vineyards, for example, for water retention, if I want to make a vineyard in Keyline, they don't fund because they don't know what it is. Everything has to be very square, and they have all those measures. They think it's good. But I can change it. If I want to change it, I'll have to use all of my money to put it into it, and they will not fund it, for example. And hand labor is very difficult now to get. I'd like to harvest by hand, for example. I don't find enough people to do it, and it's not easy. A lot of the work in the vineyards I wanted to do by hand, or it's not easy. I don't want to compact the soil, for example, with tractors most of the times, and I have to because I don't have people to work in the vineyards. It's not very easy. If I want to put laying hens, for example, in my vineyards, the legislation, it's not easy also, because if I have more than 49 hens, I have a lot of paperwork to do, and it's almost impossible. Yeah, and also the consumer awareness also to buy regenerative products. It's not, at least in Portugal, it's very niche. You have to educate the consumer also, and to explain them the difference between regenerative products and the others that are not, and they are raised with chemicals. So it's a lot of work to do. Those are the main, I think, the roadblocks.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that about the difficulty in finding human support and how much more difficult that has gotten. That's often not talked about. I think we should probably do a whole episode just on that, on the challenges of farm labor and the reasons behind it. So I appreciate you mentioning that. Howard, same question to you. What are the roadblocks that are preventing you from doing all the things that you think are necessary for this adaptation?
Actually, everything that's been mentioned, surprisingly, except for labor, because we work a lot with volunteers. I think we have about 30 to 40 regular volunteers every week. And we have 200 to 300 on the list that we can make a call on for, like, on a Saturday if we have really big jobs. And yeah, that's really nice to see. And when we also ask them, well, basically, if they come and work for a whole day in the mud and the rain, like today, planting trees, when they leave, they thank us. And that really surprised me in the beginning. And nowadays, after having talked to them also and stuff, a lot of them have got like a desk job in which they don't really feel super useful. And being a consumer in this society, they always feel like they're part of the problem. And by coming out to our farm and getting like a really concrete, often well-organized task to do and a nice communal lunch, they feel that they can contribute something, and they feel a bit of a sense of purpose. So it's part of our DNA as a farm, and we really invest in creating the infrastructure for our volunteers and creating the atmosphere, and it works out nicely. Besides that, it also feels good to sometimes just sort of join discussions like this and realize that it doesn't matter if you're in Greece or Portugal or Netherlands, the rules and the locked-in system, it's shit everywhere. And I think that gives a bit of strength, and also to know that, like, throughout Europe, there are people fighting by themselves and together to make a change in that sense. And yeah, the last thing I'd like to mention, in the Netherlands, we've got a group of journalists. They called Follow the Money. And basically their logic is that in a capitalist society, if you don't understand how or why something's working the way it is, what you need to do is you need to follow the money. And then at the source of the money, someone's earning money somewhere, and that'll explain why the things are being done the way they're being done. And basically, I think in this sense also, that's the case. All the obstacles we run into, if you follow the money, there's some person in the system which is actually earning money, doing it the way it's being done right now, and not wanting to change it. Even with I heard about the poultry, in Holland also, you're allowed to have 249 chickens, and otherwise you get other rules. But even if you're below the 249, when the bird flu comes, you have to keep your chickens inside. But our chickens are not in danger of the bird flu, and they're not in danger of making a crossover towards human disease. No, that's the chickens that are kept. We have chicken barns in the Netherlands, chicken factories where there are like 200,000 chickens being held in one place. That's where the bird flu is the danger, and that's the risk that's being caused. But basically, the rules are protecting those places and making it nearly impossible for us to keep chickens. And I think what we're seeing here slowly but surely is that our problems are becoming big enough for society and the government and even the industry players to realize, okay, we can't actually keep this up for much longer. So we need to start looking towards new ways of doing things. And I'm a strong advocate here in the Netherlands. I learned it a while ago. You would like evolution, technology and innovations, and revolution, technology and innovations. And I'm always advocating we need a bit of a revolution in this sort of stuff as well, because if we just have incremental change and keep on doing things kind of similar to what we were doing before, it's not going to help us. And even now, we're actually the body that actually distributes the CAP money within the Netherlands. They're looking into setting up a pilot next year and taking some pioneer farms out of the system completely and saying, okay, you guys are doing a pretty damn good job. We're going to set up a integrated, sort of a holistic management plan together with you. And basically, you're just going to get your money, your subsidies or whatever without having to jump through all the hoops, but because you're doing it well and we trust you. And then they're going to see how that works. So I think there are some steps being taken which are quite hopeful towards all the many challenges we're facing.
Well, you already answered the next question that I had, which is, despite all of these hurdles, what gives you hope? I really appreciate you explaining the things that sort of give a silver lining to the storm clouds of everything that we're facing. So same to you, Sergio. What around you gives you hope? What makes you think that, these improvements and adaptation are possible?
Well, what gives me hope is that more and more people are looking at what we are doing, and perhaps we are serving and some people are implementing cover crops, for example, which is something that people wouldn't do some years ago. And yes, then people are realizing that they have to change, and also decommoditizing the products they do. And for example, grapes, they're being sold for a very cheap price now, and because it's becoming it's becoming a commodity for many years now, and it's becoming worse and worse. And people are thinking that they have to decommoditize and to get out of that system. And yeah, it's also I think the consumer now is creating more and more awareness because there's more information everywhere. And I think so. And of course, the work we are doing in the soil, I think there's a lot of opportunity there to store more carbon and to enhance the soil quality. And of course, we have a vision for the next 50 or 60 years in our farm. So hopefully my children or my daughters and my nephews will realize that that's the way and continue to work. Yeah, I think there's hope.
That is beautiful. Thank you, Sergio. And Beata, same to you. What gives you hope in this situation? Because you have got your fingers in a lot of different side projects that I know are helping to propel you and keep motivation going.
Yes, and I think that's the main reason why we are still doing it. I mean, one is And that's really maybe because for those who don't know the background, I'm coming from finance, my husband as well, so data finance. So with regards to making a living and success and money and all of that, that was definitely the easier lifestyle. But we do this consciously and hope driven for the cause, but also like, I mean, day to day, it's just how you are feeding your family and seeing that all of this stuff works. That is like the daily fuel, definitely. The biggest one for me beside that is very much in line with what Howard said, seeing the impact that it has on other people. Visiting the farm, agritourism, doing workshops and teaching, even the responses on social media or on blog posts from customers that are reaching out, that are interested, that are following up, even more so whenever we are doing something for kids, also locally. Because despite being in a small village, very few of them really have a good understanding of how food is grown, how all of that works together, let alone in a playful or joyful manner. So that is something that is super, super huge. But then also looking around us, I think there is so much good stuff happening. There is nutrition and agriculture coming a lot closer together. So with the whole One Health concept, people looking more into not only which quantities do we produce, but which type of nutrients, with annual versus perennial diet. So there's a whole lot of movement going on that side, on the healthcare side. The same holds true for investments, both the typical ones, the banks and insurances who are now reaching out to us, not only as individual farmers, but also EARA. Examples that Howard just mentioned. How can we work together? How can we actually use that as investable projects as well to transition into regenerative agriculture? That is one. And then, well, also day to day, it is really just like having this community around. It's the climate farmers chats that are popping up. It's nerding out in the WhatsApp groups. It's collaborating with EARA, with Regenerative Farming Greece. So just knowing that you're not out there, but the bubble is growing around you as well. It's not really a solo gig that we are running anymore.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that. And that's exactly why we do what we do, you know, the knowing that you're not in this by yourself. And even though in the community that you're in, maybe people treat you like the crazy person, but together in the sharing of our ideas, our advancements, our learnings, it really does make the journey easier. And I'm so glad to hear that it's had that effect for you as well.
It has, and it also has that effect of social proof.
Yeah.
Because, like you said, most of us really are the aliens within their local environments.
And that's really
and
hard in
being
rural
laughed
communities.
about, being talked
Yeah.
about, and just having that group, like a family chat that is out there, but also being on the list of some European projects, such as just having your farm down as a lighthouse farm, as a living lab, etc., just gives a very different social proof to keep going as well. Yeah, that's a huge point.
Indeed. Well, look, that really takes us full circle in this conversation, and I'm going to give it over to our audience to ask questions if you'd like. They've been very active in the chat, but if anybody would like to raise their hand digitally or otherwise, I will call on you first. You'll get priority. Otherwise, I'll start to read off some of the questions from the chat. So go ahead. I'll give a second. Don't be shy. All right. In the chat, there were some questions about financing. There was some comments about the value of poultry and fungi together, disease prevention and building perfect conditions, as well as spreading spores. Look, along that line, Howard, I am exactly in the position you were talking about with the regulations causing us to shut in our poultry because of the avian flu. And I can tell that you have thought about this a lot and know how to articulate it well. Can you maybe explain why that being the knee-jerk regulatory reaction is very misguided? You already started with it, but maybe you can add on to that. I think it's really important at this moment.
Yeah, I think what you see, and I can speak for the Netherlands because that's where I have my experience. But in the last 100 years, we've developed towards a now dominant system of agriculture, which is an industrial system with large-scale monocultures and centralized logistics. And because that's the system that has been developing, we've developed regulations that fit that system. And For example, with birds, with chicken, we see that now with bird flu, it's, I don't know, in Dutch it's called the zoonose, which is a disease which can actually mutate. It's a virus that mutates, and then you have the chance that a mutation can actually spread to humans. So it's dangerous, but it's dangerous. The virus works by spreading from chicken to chicken, and every time it's spread, there's a chance there's a mutation, and that's how sort of a virus evolves. And if you have 200,000 chicken next to you altogether, and this virus spread from chicken to chicken, then you statistically have a lot higher chance that basically this virus is going to mutate into something that's dangerous for humans. So basically the rule that we say, oh my God, if there's bird flu, all your chickens have to be inside, and if you have bird flu in your flock, you have to kill them all. It's a very logical regulation that fits the dominant system. But if you're now a farmer that actually has a system and you say, okay, my chicken actually follow in the crop rotation and they're in a mobile system and there are 249 of them and they're walking outside all the time, then this rule doesn't make any sense, because the chance is zero that the virus will spread into something that is dangerous for humans. And these chickens also have often a lot better resistance. So maybe they get a bit sick and maybe 2 die and the rest just carry on. And what now happens is that you see that basically these regulations allow the industrial scale chicken holders that actually have chickens, they have infrastructure which are meant to keep the chickens inside, they can deal with this. But if you don't have this infrastructure and basically you want to give your chickens a good life in an agroforestry system, and now you have to keep them inside, it ends up that your chickens have got a shittier life than the industrial held chickens. And we have something, well, the whole of Europe has got something that's called PFAS. That's these microplastics, which are everywhere. And nowadays, because these microplastics are everywhere, they're also in pesticides, which are used in the agricultural land. So our duck eggs, we had them tested. They have 7 times the European norm of PFAS in the eggs. And basically, the authorities in the Netherlands are now advising us to only eat industrial chicken eggs and not eat free-range chicken eggs anymore, because there's so much microplastics in our environment. But the companies actually emitting these microplastics, they're still going. So basically, rather than tackling the source, they're now telling us not to eat free-range chicken eggs anymore because they're unhealthy. So this whole idea is like, but then to get back to my point, what you then see is that the big players who are now winning in this dominant system, they don't want these regulations to change because these regulations work in their favor. And you also see it with, for example, like quite a few dairy farmers in the Netherlands. They started selling unpasteurized milk again, straight from the farm. And basically the big dairy companies, they went to the government and they started suing the small dairy farmers, saying they were breaking the hygiene laws and that you're not allowed to sell this. It was dangerous for public health. And they actually won. So you're only allowed to buy factory produced milk in the Netherlands, and the small farmers are not actually allowed to sell their milk from their farm step anymore because it doesn't fit the rules which fit the dominant system. And yeah, I think seeing that, opening your eyes to that and being able to articulate on that, also when talking to policymakers and at a higher level, I think that's really, really important. It can actually really help.
Thank you so much for explaining that in further detail. I couldn't agree more. And without going into further conspiracy, it's very obvious that there is a concerted attempt to create dependency on the system that's been built, right? When you have other options, when you can build resilience into your system, when you have diversified enterprises that are connected to communities and don't go through all these other routes in which middlemen and industries are constantly taking off the top, not only are these enterprises more financially viable, but they're much more independent, and are the communities and the people around them. And that undermines the dependence on these massive industrial systems that need to keep themselves propped up through these very arbitrary and extremely destructive regulations that are the only thing keeping them competitive at this point. Because as soon as these things break down, people are smart enough to realize that, okay, maybe there are some PFAS in the free-range chicken eggs, but that's a problem of the industry that creates the poison, not the healthier way of bringing an animal into its natural habitat. And so we don't need to go further into that, but actually our next panel is going to be specifically on policy and advocacy and how agriculture is shifting and where there are opportunities at these legislative levels going into the next year. So we'll go deeper into that then. I'm still not seeing a lot of questions coming from the group. We've got some sleepy people here on a Thursday. So if you guys are going to be quiet, I can go all night. We're in my wheelhouse. I'll just start shooting questions. Yeah. Okay, so Beata, in your case, with the long laundry list of the difficult things that you've had to come up with, the very nonsensical legislation that is starting to tell you to take some of your most productive and healthiest areas out of production because stewardship at this point is seen as destruction. If you maintain bare soil, if you've got a moonscape and only one cultivar, very similar to here in Spain and other parts of the world where I've traveled, that is considered good stewardship. What does the conversation look like with someone who tells you that you are not taking care of your land when you are doing the best things for its health?
Look, I have to agree there with Gabe Brown. He keeps saying like the biggest problem is between our ears. And that's really the case. I see it as a blessing that we came into farming as complete outsiders. Because for a lot of people, there's just so many assumptions, concerns, and like you said, especially this idea of having a clean, very organized, straight orchard, that is a thing. And that has grown over generations. It has grown over showing that you are active on the field. And it's also a way of really just visualizing what is happening there, right? I mean, that's something that is easy for people to grasp. I think that that's something that is going on. If you have to wade through 1.5 meter high, what they perceive weeds between my 3 rows, then maybe that is seen as, well, Beate is just slacking along or doesn't know what she's doing. But nobody's looking at like, well, that's actually cover crop that we planted, that got inoculated, that got seeded without heavy machinery, that, like Sergio said, most is being done manually in a hand way. If you're spraying copper, Herberto made a good point on that one as well. It's very easy to see and visual because you're also, I mean, it comes out as like this blue, shiny coating of the leaves. So neighbors and farmers can see like who's doing a good job doing that weekly. Me spraying compost tea instead of anything that kills the biology, you cannot even see that. So I think one thing is really, even before you get to the point of understanding what is happening, just visually, there's nothing happening on our fields. You cannot understand that. So you don't even get into the conversation. And it's very difficult to approach those type of farmers on the intellectual level, not only because of the perception and the culture, but also because you're essentially telling them what you are doing is wrong. And that makes a very tricky conversation to be had, especially when you are coming in as an outsider. So that makes you look like the arrogant one that is coming in from the city and now is doing everything differently and telling you to do so. So I think it has to be a balanced setup, again, through kids, their grandchildren or direct children in the village coming to our farm and seeing just there's more life, there's more stuff happening. Actually, there's a reason behind those things that we are doing. At the same time, also, even though that is unfortunate, not to talk about it too much, but really lead through, we are just having the better results. I'm having less expenses. I'm not sitting in the agronomist office every other week and purchasing fertilizers and doing the work and a tractor and every week copper and every week spraying against olive fly. But still we have good harvest results. And even when we are not irrigating, it's also without approaching them directly, but letting them find out themselves through Facebook, through social media. Well, actually their olive oil got tested. It actually did get awards. They can actually sell it at a much higher price point than I do. So there must be something to it. And then have other farmers coming to you to ask slowly, what is happening there? Why do you do it that way? But it that is a tricky thing, and it needs a lot more time than I would have imagined in the beginning. It's not that easy.
Those fantastic insights. And you mentioned too the results, of course, and the better harvest. And that makes me want to go to Sergio, who mentioned the success he's been having with nutrition management in the vines and how you're managing that with sap analysis. Maybe let's go a little deeper into that, because I know a lot of people are interested in this topic. I'd love to know how you're doing it.
Well, so yeah, it's a perennial plant. So I usually do. Well, I started some years ago doing seven analyses throughout the growing season. But now that I know the flows, the nutrients, and all of that, I'm doing less. I'm doing like 4 now. It's very important to know, and usually the farmer or the agronomist thinks that the very important thing is what is lacking in nutrition, in the nutrients, but many times it's what is in excess. So, and that allows us to know first what we don't have to apply anymore, and we will not spend money there, and which is very important, because if we have some excess nutrients, they are blocking the others. So that first thing is to know what not to apply, and many times the farmer doesn't know, because some years ago when I used to do leaf analysis, they only gave me the macronutrients and some micros, but didn't have the flows between them. And we take an older leaf and the younger leaf, and we know what's the difference between them. We know the flows, and we also know which nutrients are more important to enhance photosynthesis, for example, like magnesium, manganese, iron. And if you want to lift the bricks of the plant, and we have to what we have to apply, and we also have 22 different parameters. So it's not only the nutrients, it's also the sugars, that's the final and the end of photosynthesis. So the more sugars, the better, and the more solid nutrients. And yeah, it's very important, for example, for protein synthesis. To enhance protein synthesis is very important for the attacks of insects, because the insects usually attack plants that are not very healthy, and that the form of nitrogen in them, it's the lower form of nitrogen, like nitrates. And if you know what are the micronutrients that we need to put in the plant to enhance that, for example, one very important nutrient, that it's molybdenum, for example, that it's the catalyzer, or it's from the enzyme called nitrate reductase. It is very important to put the plant to be able to put those lower forms of nitrogen into higher forms, like amino acids, and then complete proteins, and the insects will not attack them. So it's very important to know that also.
Yeah, this is all very in line with the plant health pyramid, which was brought up in the chat down there. There is definitely seeing the parallels between immunity, plant immune responses, being immune to diseases and pests, and these higher levels of synthesis, starting with photosynthesis at the base that you were mentioning. And also our mutual friend, Harriet Mella, would say a lot about just how important proper nutrient management is also to water and moisture handling in plants. And as the temperatures get higher, as water becomes more scarce in these times, adequate nutrition can really help plants to overcome these drought periods. Now, I'll get to a couple of questions. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Sergio.
Yeah, zinc and manganese, for example, are very important for the hydric balance in the plant.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm going to go to a couple of these that have shown up in the chat. And there's one from Ramos for Beata, who's asking, how are you dealing with the compost case? You want to elaborate on that and the difficulties that you've been facing?
Yes, I already replied in the chat. So even though I don't want to expand on the first option, that we are dealing with it too much, because it's essentially doing it secretly. So really just reducing it to such a scale that a compost turner can still be used. So I'm not breaking just my back, but really that it's not. So just getting it to the amount that we can get to the right temperatures, also because again of getting rid of diseases, etc., spores, seeds, etc., but not too big so that we are not falling under hazard regulations, fire risks because of self-combustion, etc., but really more something you wouldn't call it household scale, but also not thinking of a huge composting facility. So that's number one. And I think that's what a lot more farmers need to be doing. But it's just very time intensive. Not everybody has the machinery. So there needs to be a lot more collaboration and also education on really just how beneficial it is. And teaching people when we are talking about producing compost, it's not just transforming waste into a form of organic matter that we can use to top up our soils, but really just all of the benefits that come with a microbiology. I think that's really key there. But in terms of the work, the second part is the much more time intensive and bigger one. That's really weekly calling again the office of our local environmental management office for Greece, but also for the municipality, talking to them, reminding them, working with other groups and collaborations, also on the EU level. I was just 2 weeks ago speaking for the European Mission Soil Week in Denmark and just reminded them as well, it's all nice and well what you're talking about, and like a lot of amendments and mentioning compost as one of the key inputs. But if you are not allowing good compost production without sealing the soil, which again is on the minus side, even on the EU level, then we are not going to get good quality compost for an affordable price. So addressing it there, and also locally trying to get it just completely moved out of the waste management classification, because that's the key issue here. And I think it's fair to assume for any municipal composting facilities that are throwing bunch of household waste in there where you don't know exactly what's in there, from restaurants, and sometimes it's plastic, garbage inside of there, sometimes disease. That's not the case for the compost producers that I'm also talking to, because we are selecting our inputs. It's directly sourced, it's measured to make sure that there is no self-combustion, there is temperatures being reached to make sure we are not spreading disease, etc., and educating them. And that is just, it needs a lot of patience, but that's something living in Greece has taught me anyway. So I will just keep doing that.
Well, I really admire your courage and your persistence. Along these lines, Alberto asked, how is the Common Agricultural Policy allowed to block most of these regen practices on your farms? Do you want to take that one first, Beata? Is most of the pressure coming from the European Union scale, or is this more local?
I would say more local, not just based on my own perception, but when talking to other farmers. With the CAP, we're dealing more with what are we actually paying farmers for, and where are we guiding the ship and steering the ship. I think that's the main issue that is being faced right now with the Common Agriculture Policy, because it's really just essentially broken down to very simple terms, paying by size, farm size. And that, of course, very much in line with what Howard described, is moving the whole system into a direction that we don't want to move into, and just increasing pressure on the land prices as well. So that is an issue. That's something, the whole CAP, we did write a proposal together as EARA farmers on how we would like that to change and to be seen. On the barriers, though, a lot of it is, again, working all right as long as you're just having one farm type operation and following that. Then it's pretty easy to get along with everything to be CAP approved. The moment that you try to mix up things, to break the rules, to do testing, to be experimenting, to go beyond what is seen as normal in the eyes of bureaucrats and those making the rules, then it gets really tricky and is blocking, yes.
That's interesting. So Sergio and Howard, whoever wants to take this, does this track with your own experiences? Are these also the government bodies or the sources for the difficulties that you've been experiencing?
Yeah, I think what I see in the Netherlands is that sort of good things that come from Europe are claimed by local politicians as personal successes. Personal failures at the local or provincial or national level are blamed on Europe. So for Dutch farmers and Dutch public, it's very difficult to see what good things are coming from Europe and what bad things are actually being done at the level that we do actually have influence on, because it's yeah, I think it's ambitious politicians that are just distorting the truth in that sense. And I think that if you look at certain elements of the common agricultural policy, I've been following this a bit lately, and there are now also some civil servants within the Netherlands that are also on LinkedIn quite vocal about this. They really dug into, okay, what does Europe actually say? What does Europe say about our water quality and about our nitrogen and about how we need to administrate the system in order to spend the common agricultural policy money in the Netherlands? And what you see is that the Netherlands tend to interpret the rules to very much the strictest letter of the word, or word of the letter, or letter of the word. And while there's actually a lot more space in European regulations and in the common agricultural policy to actually interpret that in a way that could actually help us move in the right direction. And I don't think it's always in this sense only that people have bad intentions, but it's also that I think there's some friction between entrepreneurs and agricultural entrepreneurs that are willing to take risks and civil servants that function in a culture in which they're risk adverse. And then if you are given some space, but you're in a culture where it's not encouraged to take risk, what you're going to do is you're going to play it safe. You're going to fall back into the way that we've always done it and find all the little rules that stipulate stuff. Well, there's actually a lot more space to create a new playing field, and that space isn't being taken up at the moment, at least in the Netherlands.
That's a really important insight and really gives an idea of how these cycles in the political spectrum just lead to, the worst practices from all sides, while everyone tries to cover their back by blaming other people. Sergio, how does this track with your experience in Portugal?
Well, I think Howard and Beat, they said everything. I also talked about it previously. If you want to do something different, you are not helped in any way. It's very difficult. Yeah. I have one question. Can I ask a question?
Of course you can.
We have here Miriam Blaha that was saying feed the polypore mushrooms. What is that? I'm not familiar. Maybe Howard can explain it.
No, I also saw this, I think, in response to the PFAS thing, and I just Googled polypore mushrooms, but I couldn't quickly find that they sort of break down PFAS or something like that. So maybe the person who I will put this in the chat could could enlighten us.
Miriam,
Oh, well, hey, good evening. Yeah, I'm Konstantin Steinmeier here from Germany as well. Did a lot of research on fungi, especially in agriculture systems and micro-remediation. So that's kind of my topic. Breaking down also bad compounds in the soil, toxic waste. But the polypore mushroom was more for diseases in chickens. So chickens are the best fungi races we have in the forest systems. So especially talking about agroforest systems, chickens are kind of the breeder of fungi. If you feed them, for example, with polypore mushrooms, which I do, so I have logs on who I cultivate certain types of fungi. And I mean, you all know who had chickens, they love things that are kind of white. So that's an indicator for me that they love mycelium and fungal structures. So they're going to digest it, and that's for their benefit. For example, talking about bird flu or other flu diseases, you kind of can boost their immune system to keep them healthy. And as well, the soil work that they're doing, bringing out spores throughout the system is quite significant. So that was more on the topic of the health issues of the chicken. And actually, talking about politics, do you guys know the wonder from Malz, like an Italian community that raised up against pesticides and kind of then got blocked on a higher political level? There's a wonderful movie. So, I mean, if you really want to get active and have an example how actually a whole village raises against pesticide and stands up for clean water, air, and soil, that's kind of what happened in the European scheme if you really stand up for your positions.
Man, thank you for those contributions. That was really cool, both about the fungi and if you could maybe send a link in the chat there for people to check out. I'm sure that would be of interest to a lot of folks here. And on that note, we're just about out of time. I gotta say, I knew I picked the right people for this panel, but I was still blown away by the insights, by the knowledge, the experience that you guys shared. I want to thank you so much for making time out of your busy schedules to be here and answer my goofy questions. And I really look forward to hopefully getting to see you guys in person again really soon. It's been far too long. And for all of you who have stuck with us until this point, thank you so much for being with us and for supporting this series. You can find all of the recordings, like I mentioned before, on the Regenerative Skills podcast and the Climate Farmers YouTube channel. And come join the conversation. If you're an active farmer anywhere in Europe, we would love to have you in the community. And it's just more people to help you feel like you're not alone in the swim upstream that it is to try and farm regeneratively in Europe at this point. So again, thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your evening. And don't forget to check out the post that we'll be making for the next panel coming up on December 11th. Take care, everyone. Have a good night.
Thanks
a
so
lot.
much,
Yeah.
Oliver.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.